From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight is about the pandemic. President Joe Biden today addressed the nation in the midst of the pandemic of the unvaccinated, as he has called it earlier. Over 1,500 Americans are dying every day, while about 150,000 on average are testing positive. In his speech, President Biden announced a six-pronged plan to fight the pandemic. His plan requires all federal employees and contractors to get vaccinated. A little over 53% of Americans are fully vaccinated, including almost two-thirds of the adult population, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Overall, COVID has killed more than 651,000 Americans. In related news, at least 13 Miami-Dade school workers have died of COVID since the middle of August. All of them were unvaccinated. Dozens of women have had claims of domestic and sexual violence by intimate partners ignored by U.S. military commanders, according to a new report. A CBS News investigation this week shares the complaints by 40 women. They describe a system that is broken, with military leaders unwilling to hold abusers accountable. According to the report, about 100,000 incidents of domestic abuse have been reported to the military since 2015. Authorities in New York have identified two more victims of the 9/11 attacks at the World Trade Center. The New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner on Tuesday said it used DNA analysis to identify Dorothy Morgan and a man whose name is being withheld at the request of his family. Morgan and the man are the 1,646th and 1,647th victims to be identified through ongoing DNA analysis of unidentified remains recovered from Ground Zero. Over 1,000 of the 2,753 people killed in the attacks remain unidentified. 20 years after the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. war on terror continues at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. After a 17-month hiatus due to the COVID pandemic, pre-trial hearings of the alleged mastermind of the attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and four others are set to resume days ahead of the 20th anniversary of the tragedy. The military commission's trials of the 12 accused al-Qaeda figures have proven chaotic, unwieldy, and often contrary to U.S. law. So far, only 2 of the 12 have been convicted. The trials have been marred by accusations that the government has withheld and falsified evidence and wiretapped defense attorneys. Defendants also claim they were brutally tortured by their captors, tainting the prosecution. Apart from the 12, 17 other detainees remain at Guantanamo Bay. Some were promised a release that never came. President Biden favors closing Guantanamo Bay. With military commissions resuming hearings in May, he has sought to quietly release those not facing trial. Scholars and academics from American and international universities have organized the first major online conference on Hindutva in the United States. The Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference will examine various issues relating to the far-right Hindu nationalist ideology in India. More than 53 universities, mostly from the U.S., are sponsoring the event. They include Harvard, Stanford, and Princeton. In the past 3 weeks, conference organizers and speakers, however, are being harassed and intimidated by various Hindu right-wing groups. Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, the Coalition of Hindus in North America, and the Hindu American Foundation claim to have collectively sent more than 1 million emails to dozens of universities to withdraw support for the conference. Last week, over 50 South Asian diaspora groups and over 900 academics, including scholars of genocide and mass violence, issued a statement in support of the conference. They called for an end to Hindu right-wing attacks on academic freedom and free speech. Dr. John Esposito is a professor of religion and international affairs at Georgetown University. He said the Hindutva movement in the U.S. uses different means to disrupt academic freedom. This includes writing letters to university administrations and threatening scholars with lawsuits. Esposito said academics have a professional and moral obligation to respond to Hindutva as they would to charges of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or racism. Kabul International Airport is now open for international flights to anyone who has valid documents to travel. About 200 Afghans with dual citizenship, including about 30 Americans, flew out on a Qatar Airways flight from Kabul today. This marks the first such large-scale air departure of Afghans since August 31st. That was when the U.S. airlift concluded with the departure of foreign forces from Afghanistan. Qatar and Turkey also worked together to make Kabul airport operational. Qatar said the Taliban have demonstrated pragmatism. Qatari Assistant Foreign Minister Lalwa Al-Khatir told AFP in an exclusive interview that it would be up to the Afghans to determine their future, not the international community.
They have shown a great deal of pragmatism. Let's seize the opportunity there. And once again, we put our emotions aside, we put how we assess their ideology aside, and look at their public actions.
Qatar's capital, Doha, was the central intermediary between the Taliban and the U.S. Qatar said that the fact that many evacuees were able to leave Kabul, including many female students, was significant. She said this could not have happened without the Taliban's cooperation. Qatar also pointed out that since returning to power, the Taliban had largely left Afghan health authorities, including women doctors, free to continue administering medical care for COVID. Qatar is a U.S. ally that has emerged as a key player both in evacuations from and diplomacy on Afghanistan. The country is host to the largest U.S. airbase in the region. Nearly half of the more than 120,000 people airlifted out of Afghanistan transited through Qatar. Qatar largely oversaw Doha's evacuation operations and even received some refugees in person. Beijing said it welcomed the end of 3 weeks of anarchy in Afghanistan with the establishment of a new interim government in Kabul. It is calling on the Taliban to restore order in the country. China offered $31 million in aid to Afghanistan, which includes food and coronavirus vaccines. China, Pakistan, Qatar, and Turkey are among the countries who have kept their embassies open in Kabul, even after the Taliban takeover of the country. Israel flooded the occupied West Bank with military reinforcements on Wednesday. This was in a manhunt for 6 Palestinians who have been on the run for 3 days after escaping from a high-security prison in northern Israel. Demonstrations were held in several West Bank towns late Wednesday in support of the fugitives. Earlier, the Palestinian Prisoners Club said Israeli forces had arrested at least 6 relatives of the Palestinians who broke out of Gilboa prison. Israeli soldiers attacked Palestinians demonstrating in support of the escapees, injuring 4. The Palestine Red Crescent Society said in a statement that Israeli police used stun grenades and rubber bullets against the demonstrators. There are about 4,850 Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons, including 225 children. Since Monday, Israel has deployed drones, road checkpoints, and an army mission to Jenin, a Palestinian city in northern West Bank, in search of the prisoners. The Israeli army has occupied the West Bank since 1967. The Burmese military has released Waratu, an extremist Buddhist monk notorious for his anti-Muslim tirades. They have dropped sedition charges against him, which were brought by Aung San Suu Kyi's deposed government. Time magazine has called Waratu the face of Buddhist terror. He founded an organization that was accused of inciting violence against Muslims in Burma. A microfinance pioneer from Pakistan who developed an interest-free microfinance program was among last week's winners of Asia's equivalent to the Nobel Prize. Muhammad Amjad Saqib won the Ramon Magsaysay Award. He was recognized for his first-of-its-kind interest and collateral-free microfinance program that lifted scores of households out of poverty. Nearly 2 decades after its launch, his program, Akhuwat, has grown into the nation's largest microfinance institution. It distributes the equivalent of $900 million and boasts an almost 100% loan repayment rate. Saqib, who uses places of worship for his program, was cited for his inspiring belief that human goodness and solidarity will find ways to eradicate poverty. The Ramon Magsaysay Award is named after the Filipino president killed in a plane crash in 1957. It was established that same year to honor people and groups tackling challenges to development. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan congratulated Saqib for winning Asia's highest honor. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. In one of our previous segments, we talked about COVID-19 and mask mandates for children in schools in Texas and Florida. Let's watch.
A child younger than 5 has died of COVID-19 at a Tallahassee hospital this past month, the first child to die there of the disease, the hospital confirmed Thursday. As of Friday, 8 children younger than 16 have died with COVID-19 in Florida, where 289,000 have tested positive. Officials are calling the Delta variant a different beast. Unlike in previous waves, where the majority of pediatric hospitalizations with COVID-19 were incidental findings, the majority now are headed to the hospital specifically for symptoms related to the disease. Children under the age of 12 are not eligible for vaccines at this time. So how do we keep children safe from this different beast? To discuss this, we have with us Dr. Uzma Sayed, a COVID expert and infectious disease specialist. Welcome, Dr. Sayed.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how do we keep children safe as schools are opening up and parents and teachers are worried?
That's an excellent question. And I think the safety and health of our children and our communities should be the utmost priority. As you've mentioned before, Delta is a whole new beast. And I think with every new emerging variant that we have with SARS-CoV-2, we've seen that it becomes more and more complicated because these variants are becoming more and more transmissible. So what that means is that it's very easy for a person to be affected and in fact get infected from someone who is actively infected with this virus. You need very little amount of time for someone to be exposed. And we know that children right now under the age of 12 are not eligible for vaccinations. So what we can do is really protect them by getting all the people that are around them vaccinated so that we can really bring the level of virus down in our communities at a time where the virus is surging throughout our country and throughout the world. We really have to do better to protect all the children.
What are some common sense precautions that schools should be taking, especially private schools?
That's a great question. You know, we've seen in the past year how schools really have not been the main place where virus has been spreading rapidly because of all the mitigation strategies that have put into place. Now that we have vaccinations, in addition to that, we really can open the schools up in a safe way if we continue to make sure that all faculty, staff, administrators are vaccinated. All children above the age of 12 are vaccinated, and we continue to use all of those protective measures, the layers of mitigation strategies that we have that we know work. Masks are very good at preventing spread of virus. Distancing, ventilation is key. So all of these things have been proven to be effective, and we have to ensure that we use the multiple different approaches to really have that layered approach so that we are having a safe environment for our children.
So what if you live in a state with a school mask mandate ban? More than 800 physicians in Florida have signed a letter to Governor DeSantis asking him to repeal his school mask mandate ban. So what would be your advice to parents in those states?
You know, unfortunately, this pandemic has really been very much a political one. And, you know, we have to separate the science from the politics. You know, we're talking about the health and the well-being and the lives and livelihoods of children and adults. And we know scientifically, we know what works. We know that the vaccines work. We know that masks work. And until we can get really the virus level really low in our communities, we have to do the precautions, the right precautions that we know work to keep the number of people safe in our communities. So for parents and for children alike, I would say really try to get vaccinated and get the kids around you vaccinated. Masks really do work, and I would encourage people to use their voices to really make sure that our children are safe, in our communities and in our schools, to really voice your concerns about how important these masks are, at least until the level of virus is very low in the communities. In Florida, unfortunately, they have significant surges. We have seen the pediatric cases go up significantly week after week. We're averaging about 200 kids being hospitalized a day, and we have to protect everybody, especially the children who may be most vulnerable now.
You're talking about effective measures. Are temperature checks effective?
Unfortunately, temperature checks are not really effective, as we would have hoped they would have been. What we're seeing, especially, there's a wide spectrum of disease that people can have. Some people, as you know, can be asymptomatic. Some people can have mild symptoms. So what that means is that they may not have a temperature at all. So that's not going to be the only thing that's going to help you really detect this. At this point in the pandemic, when we have readily available vaccines, this has become a vaccine preventable illness. And so we really have to focus on that. But a good screening questionnaire would be good. It's really an honor system at this point. So we really have to have these conversations with parents to urge them to get vaccinated to protect their children, their loved ones, whether they have elderly people in their family, in their households. And it's really about community. And it's really about doing good for the greater good of the community, for our states, for our country, for our world.
So let's talk a little bit about mental health. It's hard to explain to young children why they need to wear a mask, why they can't hug their friends. So how do we make sure that children follow SOPs?
I think that's a really important message. We've seen, unfortunately, children have suffered so much in this pandemic. With the schools being shut down over the past year, children have really been impacted by this, and it's really had a tremendous strain on their mental health. We can see just how much they've been affected. And, we've been having these difficult conversations with children, but, we have to remember that children are really resilient. And for the most part, children have done really well with wearing masks in the past year in schools. They've done better than most adults have. And so, we just have to have these open conversations with them and explain to them what is the mask actually doing. It's protecting them, it's protecting their loved ones. And until, they can get vaccinated, this is how we can ensure that they will be safe and they can still have that social interaction. There's lots of activities that are safe. Outdoors is safer than indoors. And so we can promote them having that social interaction that is needed, as well as getting them back to school, which is so essential for them, for, their physical, mental, and emotional well-being.
Now, this is a question from an audience member. Can you give us some examples of effective approaches to lunch amongst the 11 and under set?
That's a great question. And I think, if there's a thing that's worked, we've seen in the past that, a staggered approach to lunchtime and meals is very effective. So, anytime you have crowding and large crowds gathering and indoor spacing, that's where you can have a difficult scenario. So ventilation is key, as I mentioned before. So if schools can really promote adequate ventilation, that's another safety measure. Keeping the household itself safe. So if you have, the children really are exposed from adults. So if we can keep the adults at home healthy and safe, that's less exposure for the children. Same thing goes for faculty members and administrators and teachers. If they're vaccinated and healthy, then that's less exposure for the kids as well. And then once you have children that are, eating, you can essentially try to stagger the meal time as best as possible, have the spacing and have adequate ventilation. And that can really be, a safer environment to be in.
So before we let you go, can you reiterate what is this Delta variant and how is it affecting the population?
So the Delta variant, is a new variant for this coronavirus, and we have seen that it's been proven to be much more transmissible. If you look at the original virus that we have, one infected person could, in fact, infect between 2 and 3 people. Then we had the Alpha variant, which was more infectious than the original variant. The Alpha was the B.1.1.7 variant, and we saw that number went up from 2 to 3 to about 4 to 5. Now we have the Delta variant, which is even more infectious, than the Alpha variant. And, this number from one infected person, you could infect up to 8 people. So, they've been proven to have, these people that are infected with Delta have 1,000 times more viral particles, meaning that they're so much more infectious, meaning that you really need a small amount of time of exposure to get infected. So it really, has changed the landscape, and you can see with the number of cases across the country, the surge in cases throughout our nation and throughout the globes, how much more problematic this is. And, with vaccines, this is something that we can really help control before the virus keeps circulating, where we have more and more emerging variants that at some point may escape these current vaccines. Right now, the vaccines that we have that are approved by the FDA are all effective against our variants, including the Delta variant. So that's really the strongest tool that we have in our toolbox right now. But, I urge everyone to really continue to take precautions, get vaccinated. And while there's so much virus in your communities, still continue to wear your mask when you're in crowded indoor settings, especially if you're going to be around people that you don't know their vaccination status, you don't know if they're healthy or if they're sick. And if you take these right precautions, then, we will get ahead of this at some point.
Thank you so much for your insight. I just wanted to ask you one more question. With flu season coming up, what would be your advice to parents if kids are showing symptoms? We've heard of cases where parents have let kids go to school while they have fever.
I think for any respiratory illness, I think it's really important that we really hone in on these principles, that we keep children home when they're not feeling well. We've dealt with influenza year in, year out, and, now we're dealing with, COVID-19, which is a whole other beast, as you mentioned before. But we have to really focus on how contagious this is and how dangerous it can be for somebody to be infected and then attend school. So any symptoms that children might be exhibiting, it's really important that they stay home until they're feeling better, that they get evaluated by a medical professional, and they not return to school until they're really feeling better and their symptoms have resolved. We have seen that, with the mask mandates that were here last year, our flu numbers were practically non-existent. So we know that these measures really work. And we know that masks help with COVID-19 as well. So we just want to ensure that people are taking the right precautions. It is going to be an honor system, but we really have to think about the people that you are going to be exposed to, that your child might be exposing as well. And we really want to make sure that we are continuing to practice safety for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Syed, for your insight and expertise. Stay safe.
Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table.
I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now.
and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To commemorate the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attack, a special guest is joining Imam Malik Mujahid to discuss the role of the FBI. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. Mike Rollins was a special agent in charge of FBI in Washington, D.C. when the whole 9/11 happened and investigation and all that. He told us that FBI has interviewed 700,000 Muslims in America. And he says that none of those interviews revealed any information whatsoever which could have helped FBI prevent 9/11. He actually says your community is one of the cleanest community he has seen. Well, we have another FBI agent, a former special agent, who says there was an information which FBI had, and the person was in the detention before 9/11, that might have prevented all of this. So welcome, Special Agent, former FBI Special Agent Colleen Rowley.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Muslim Network. Tell me that do you believe that 9/11 was preventable?
Well, it's not only Colleen Rowley who believes that, but the 9/11 Commission assessment was that there were at least 10 different ways of having prevented 9/11, one of which was the case in Minneapolis involving a terrorist suspect who was taken into custody on August 16th, and later, of course, was connected to the 19 hijackers and the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks. However, Rawlins's headquarters thwarted the Minneapolis agents from getting permission to conduct searches that would have shown that Zacharias Moussaoui, that terrorist suspect, already in custody, was connected to the plot. Again, that's only one of 10 different ways. The easiest way to have prevented 9/11 was for people like Rawlins to have read their memos that were coming to them. Rawlins claimed after 9/11 that he had not read a memo dated April 2001, 5 months before 9/11, that was entitled Chechen terrorist leader Abu Khattab and Osama bin Laden are entwined in planning to attack. So he's afterwards, it was addressed to his name along with 8 other assistant directors. He said, I never read the memo. And that essentially was the story before 9/11, that many of these officials either didn't read their intelligence memos or in fact, they read them and just claimed they didn't see them afterwards.
So, Colleen, is there too much workload on this supervisors of FBI that they are not reading such a critical information?
Well, I don't know. I think some of this is there's no mechanism to even track what was seen and read. That's a lot of the problem. And I don't think it was ever corrected. It turns out that George Tenet claimed, even the head, the director of Central Intelligence, and he actually was privy to almost all of these pieces of info, including the Moussaoui case. He was briefed on August 23rd or 24th, fundamentalist extremist learns to fly. Okay, so he was briefed already in August, and later he claimed that he did not know about some of these pieces of information as well, and he could not explain why he didn't act on the information. So again, it's not me, it's the 9/11 Commission itself that found that there was a failure to share information up the chain of command inside agencies, but also between agencies. The CIA did not let the FBI know that 2 of the hijackers had come into California. They knew that for a long time. They'd been tracking this group for 2 years, and they never told the FBI anything about this until it was too late. And then the other thing was the 9/11 Commission said it was a failure to share information with the public. And so media outlets like your own media outlet, really the mission is to share information with the public. Because in many of these cases, it's the public that actually prevents the terrorist act from occurring. Even in the New York Times bomber, that was people walking by the car that saw smoke coming from the car. The shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, they were all stopped by members of the public and not by the FBI. So it's even important to share this information with the public, but instead there's an excessive secrecy in government. And what we now know, of course, after the launching of the misbegotten wars in the Mideast, is a lot of this is to cover up deceitful propaganda. It's also to cover up failures and their own problems and agendas, secret agendas that are going on. So they put secrecy on this information, which actually should be shared much more widely, not only with the agency personnel, but also with the public.
Well, Colleen, you're saying that the wars were essentially cover up for the failure here, but is the interview of 700,000 American Muslims in some way you found was part of that cover up? Because those people who did that, 19 hijackers, they were foreigners. They were spending their time in bars and prostitution rings instead of mosque, but it were the mosque which came under attack and the American Muslim community. So what is the correlation here?
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised that this hundreds of thousands of Muslims that were contacted didn't know things. I think most of them probably had no knowledge about Islamic extremism or Al-Qaeda. I think that was probably true. Almost none of them would have known. There might have been a few, and certainly the ones that stood out like sore thumbs in flight schools. Most of those were probably not, those would have been Americans, not Muslims. They would have been, flight instructors and things like that. You're right. Maybe some others in mosques, and it might have been that some people in mosques, but I think that would have been a small number. And if they didn't land on the right people, they would not have learned about 9/11 that way, because of course, when you have a terrorist plot, it is held closely by the members of the conspiracy. Now, there were Saudis. I think the one thing that is still coming out, because the 9/11 victims have never been allowed to get the truth. They've also been thwarted by the FBI, especially from not knowing what happened. And even the 9/11 Commission left out a huge part of the intelligence. So there were some extremists that in the Saudis that were apparently helping the terrorists. And now there's a lawsuit. It took an act of Congress to get this lawsuit, but we have our fingers crossed that maybe some truth will come out from that lawsuit about who actually did know about this terrorist plot ahead of time and kept their mouth shut.
Now share with us if after the 9/11 Commission report came out, that information sharing was not in place. Did that situation improve?
For a little while after 9/11, there was a greater sharing of information in the government. They actually made some of these databases more widely available to even lower echelon. But after WikiLeaks, when information came out about war crimes and the torture program, all of these things that came out, then the government did the exact opposite. They instituted something called the so-called insider threat, and they also started prosecuting whistleblowers. So if you were a whistleblower about drone assassination, the torture program, the mass surveillance, which by the way included mostly mass surveillance of Muslims, if you were a whistleblower about those programs, you were put in prison. And so they also made secret everything. So they're not sharing information anymore inside government. They went backward, right back to where they were. I forgot to mention that George Tenet, who was at the top of the whole intelligence agency, knew a lot of things. In fact, the Saudis were briefing him on their knowledge of Al-Qaeda movements. And yet he did nothing, and he claimed that he was other people's jobs. It wasn't his job. So, we really need more truth at this point.
And that is, we're talking 20 years after the fact here. So what was your role when you were FBI special agent in Minneapolis? Were you part of discovering this Mousavi guy or arresting him?
I was the legal counsel in the office. And so the agent, I was not an investigator of the Mousavi case, but I was called that night after they began their investigation. They were so suspicious, they called me at home at about 9:00 at night. And they were wondering, as a legal question, if they could do a so-called emergency warrantless search of Mousavi's belongings. And of course, the wisdom, it's actually correct. We should not be doing warrantless searches when you have time to go to a judge and get it authorized. So I told them that piece of legal advice, and those agents knew from the start that they had a terrorist suspect. They wrote up a draft emergency declaration pleading with headquarters for an urgent surveillance that would include a search of Mousavi's belongings. They also got information from France that confirmed their worst fears about Mousavi. He was working for the Chechen terrorist leader who was entwined with bin Laden. And then our headquarters claimed that they couldn't do anything. They claimed that this was not enough information. Officials like Robert Mueller, the director, and even Rawlins essentially lied and told the public that there was nothing that could have been done. And again, when you know the real pieces of information that existed, the clues of other terrorist suspects in flight schools, if you know that there was a hijacking of Air India where Al-Qaeda had gotten access to the cockpit 2 years before the 9/11 attacks, that had already occurred. And yet our FBI headquarters refused to really warn the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration was warned, but they were warned in a weak way. Because if they had known this, all they had to do was direct the airlines to lock the cockpit door. The very easiest way to have prevented 9/11. And of course, it was done after 9/11. Israel was already locking the cockpit doors. Very easy thing. And again, this had already occurred even before 9/11, where Al-Qaeda suspects had reached the cockpit and hijacked an aircraft. An airline. So, I mean, this is egregious that officials like Robert Mueller and Rawlins would have put out publicly that there was nothing that they could have done. I really need to add, what they did do is they used 9/11 to launch all of these wrongful, illegal programs, one of which was mass surveillance and sting operations on innocent Muslims. They did this all over the country. Of course, they also launched the torture program, and they launched wars in the Mideast that had nothing to do with the attacks. They were successful in getting 70% of the American public before the war in Iraq. They were successful in getting 70% of Americans to believe that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11. Even though Saddam Hussein was an enemy of Al-Qaeda. I mean, it's amazing what they were able to do in an opportunistic way to exploit the trauma of 9/11. But 20 years later, the families of the 9/11 victims still don't know the truth. And they're still begging and pleading with FBI to give them the documents. The FBI now claims they've lost a lot of the key photographs and other evidence.
Colleen, if you were to be FBI chief today, what are the things which we need to do to ensure that America is safer and the rest of the world is safer from us?
I think the first thing I would do as an FBI director is I would give some public talks And I would really ensure that everyone understands the truth of what happened and really the horrible way that this was exploited. I mean, because if people don't understand this, if you remember after Vietnam, there was something called the Vietnam Syndrome, which meant that Americans became educated about that war in Vietnam. They found out that it was not justified. The Gulf of Tonkin was concocted. They found out things. Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers. Walter Cronkite went public. And so this little time period where people understood the truth actually then kept wars from happening for a little while. Now, so that's the starter. People in the United States still to this day don't know the truth about 9/11. And so that's the first thing I would do. The other thing is I would actually fix some very easy bureaucratic mistakes whereby officials, when they read intelligence memos, important intelligence memos like the one that Mike Rollins saw in April of 2001, that they cannot later say, I never saw it. I never saw that memo. The Phoenix memo went up to headquarters and it had a supervisor's name on it. After 9/11, he says, I never read that memo. And so that's the first, it's so easy to fix. You think about millions of people having been killed in the wars, trillions of dollars spent, all the destruction. And you know what? I don't think the agencies ever made it so that they can tell who reads what intelligence memo. I mean, that's incredible. And that's really that's what the 9/11 Commission said. It was a problem of sharing information. And then afterwards, people don't tell the truth about it. And so these are easy things to fix. And then, of course, there would be a whole bunch of things that you could fix to make reduce terrorism. In the United States now, we have domestic terrorism that is just going steeply up. Mass shootings, for instance. Well, a lot of this is because the country became militarized, teaching little boys to play video games, Call of Duty and shooting. And then they wonder why someone who's addicted to a violent video game goes into a school. The Newtown shooter, this young man, he was addicted to violent video games and he went and shot all these 5-year-olds in a school. And that's not uncommon. We have a lot of militarized people now. They're very senseless, mass shootings. They just get a gun. They go to a church, to a mosque, to a public place, to a concert. And if they get a truck, they run over people, or if they have a gun, they shoot people. And this is actually now a big problem for the United States, but it all comes from having militarized, used 9/11 in order to launch all these wars, claim that American snipers are heroes, this kind of propaganda that's occurred. And it's going to be hard to reverse at this point because all the movies and all the rest, it's going to be hard to reverse, but it has to reverse. Otherwise, we're going to continue to go in this route, and it's really, really bad and dangerous.
Thank you so much, Colin Rodley. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.